Sterling Heights Public Library. My name is Brent, and today we're making soup. Come on down. So, Thanksgiving was last week. You may have turkey bones laying around. Well, guess what? You can use these for something. I have here about a 8 or 10 quart pot, and we got some leg bones here. We got the neck. We got a little bit of assorted skin here. Wing tips. Nobody got a hold of the wings, so those can go in. And frame. Good size frame. You might need to break up a little bit. You can often do that with your bare hands. It's not all that difficult in most cases. This is one of those places where a cleaver comes in handy if you do need to work with bigger bird or you're having trouble breaking it apart. That can kind of help you get in through some of your places where maybe a regular chef's might be a little bit more challenging. You just want to make sure that you can break this up enough that you can get it in your pan and still cover it with water. So those go in the pan. All this stuff goes in there too. I'm going to go ahead and cover this with a little bit of water and get it on the stove, and then we'll talk about some of the other ingredients here. Okay, so I've got that on the stove right now. I covered it with a little bit of water, just barely covering the bones, and I've got it on the heat right now. I want to bring that up to a simmer, and that'll get started on that. But while we're doing that, I want to go over some of these other ingredients here. So we're making a classic turkey noodle soup today, not really much different than a chicken noodle soup, almost identical in fact. So I got some carrots, I got some onions, got a little celery here, I have a bay leaf, a few peppercorns, some fresh thyme, some parsley, some frozen peas. These are optional, but I like them, and some pasta. Noodles, I happen to like farfalle for this, and I'm using the small ones here. You can use whatever your favorite is. So real quickly, I'm going to take the peppercorns here and the bay leaf and some of the thyme, and since we're going to do this right into the stock itself, we're not even going to take the stems off. Just tuck that right in there, and I'm going to throw these into the stock, and stems off the parsley too. So follow me over to the stove quick. Drop those right in there, and as that comes up to a simmer, we'll come back and talk a little bit more about what we've got going on. In the meantime, I'm going to do a little bit of prep work on the vegetables, and we'll be back in a little bit. Okay, so we've had this on the stove for a little while, and when you start it off, you can start it off on a relatively high heat, but once it comes up to a boil, you want to reduce the heat on it. You want to bring it back down to a simmer, which is about where we've got it right now. See how we've got just a few bubbles coming up, a little bit here, not a hard boil. We're going to keep it at this simmer for a while. I'm going to put the cover on it, and in about half hour, 40 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and pull it off, and we're going to pick the meat off the bones. And then return all the bones and everything back to the pot and let them go for a while. I just don't want to take that meat the entire time because that'll really affect the consistency of it. You'll lose a lot of the integrity of it. So I'm going to put the cover back on this, and we'll come back in a little bit. Okay, so this has been simmering for a little while, and the meat's tender enough to get off the bones but not falling apart. So we're going to go ahead and drain that. I've got a large bowl and a colander in the sink, and you want to be careful with this because keep in mind this is hot liquid. So go ahead and I don't want that to splash, so go ahead and set that aside for a second. And come back in a moment here. Okay, so we were getting an awful lot of liquid in there, so I went ahead and swapped out. I've got another bowl here. Still got that broth over there. I just don't want to splash this as we drop this in here because that would be quite an excitement. So what we're going to do with this, we're going to let this cool a little bit so we can handle it. And I'm going to go ahead and get the broth back in the pan and get that back on the stove. And once we've got the meat off of here, we're going to separate the meat, and we're going to put all the other stuff back in the pot and cook it for a bit longer, because we want to extract all the goodness out of that without breaking down the meat the entire way. Okay, so I let the bones and everything cool for a little bit in order to get the meat off of them. So I've got the meat picked off, and I returned everything else back to the pot with the remaining stock. And we're going to let that go for probably another hour and a half, 2 hours. You want to give it a little time for all that gelatin and collagen and all that good stuff to kind of come out of the bones and all the connective tissues and everything, and give you that nice, rich stock. This is a chicken stock I made a few days ago, and you see how it's got a little bit of a gelatinous feel to it? When you cool a proper stock, it's not going to be a full liquid anymore. It's going to go a little jelly-like. That's a good sign. It tells you there's lots of good stuff in there, and you got a nice rich stock. So I got about a cup of that mini farfalle I was talking about. If you're using noodles, you're probably going to need about a half a bag. We're not ready to add any of this stuff yet. I went ahead and chopped the parsley and some of the thyme. I got the peas here still, and I went ahead and prepped the onions and the celery and the carrots. I got about 6 cups of vegetables here. This is something called a mirepoix. This is a foundational thing for a lot of classical French cooking. It's about 2 parts onion, 1 part celery, 1 part carrots. This goes into a lot of stuff, and it's a really good building block for soup. So I've got that stock back on the stove. We're going to come back and restrain that and put this together in a little while. Okay. So we've had the stock going for a while. I went ahead and strained the bones out of it, and I've got it all set off to the side. It's still nice and hot. We're going to go ahead and start assembling the soup now. So I've got the pan back on the stove here, and I've got it over about a medium heat. And I'm going to add about a tablespoon of butter to the bottom of that pan. And just get that melted. And I'm going to go ahead and get our vegetables going in that. So one thing that you probably didn't see me do, salting the stock. I did test that and add some salt to it while it was cooking. You definitely want to make sure that that is good before you go too far with the rest of this. Okay, so that's melted. We're going to go ahead and add the carrots and onions and celery. Get those going. And we're not looking to get color on these. We're not even looking to cook them all the way through. We just want to start softening them a little bit and get all that good stuff going on in there. I am going to want to make sure that I add a little salt to this at this point too. You don't want to oversalt this stuff, but you don't want to add all your salt right at the end either. So I've got probably about 3/4 of a teaspoon there. Getting that going. Go ahead and I've got the parsley and the thyme here. Get a nice fat bunch of that. And probably about a tablespoon or so. Add that for right now. I may add a little bit more later on. And we'll come back to this in a couple of minutes. Okay, so we've been going here for probably about 6 or 7 minutes. I'm going to go turn this a little so you can kind of see in there. See how it's kind of starting to go a little translucent? Those vegetables are just starting to get a little tender. They're not fully cooked yet by any means. We're going to go to the next step here. Go ahead and add the meat back in. And I did, as I was picking that off the bones, break that up into bite-sized pieces. You want to be careful when you're picking it off the bones that there's a couple of spots, especially around the ribs and backbone, where there's some nice little pieces of meat, but you don't want to get little bits of bone in there. So Just be extra cautious in those areas that you don't wind up picking bits of bone too. Stir that in. Our stock is still nice and hot. Go ahead and start adding that in. And if you're uncomfortable pouring a large amount of liquid like this, you can always use a ladle. It's slower, but it's a little bit more secure. And that's been settling a little bit, so there's a little bit of stuff down in the bottom that we can set aside. Give this a stir. Make sure that that heat is still up fairly good. You want to bring this back up to a nice simmer. Yes, this project takes most of the afternoon, but there are a couple things you can do to take a little of the work out of it. A crock pot is a great trick for making stock and not having to spend a lot of time tending it. Put it on low for 5-6 hours. Just walk away from it. Come back when it's ready. I'm going to go ahead and give this a taste. We are very close here. Once this comes back up, I just want to cook it for a few more minutes. Get the noodles in. Check the seasonings. We'll add the peas right at the last minute, and that'll be ready to go. It's tasting pretty good. Okay, so that's been back at a simmer for a little bit, and I just checked and the carrots are tender. So it's time to go ahead and add the pasta at this point. Now, whatever pasta you're using, pay attention to the directions on the package to see how long it's going to take, because you don't want to leave pasta in there for long periods of time because it will blow up and overcook. We're going to give that about 7 minutes on the timer. We're going to add just a little bit more of this herbs in there right now. And then we're going to come back to this when the pasta's done, add the peas, and dish it up. Okay, so our pasta's got enough time on it. I'm going to go ahead and turn the heat off. I'm going to go ahead and add the peas. These cook really fast, and I like kind of the fresh flavor of them, so I'm not going to cook them for a long time. Basically, I'm going to stir them through. And then we're going to go ahead and dish this up in just a moment. And we're good to go. Okay, so let's go ahead and dish this up. Down in there, get yourself a nice bowl full of this. Got all kinds of good stuff in here. Okay, so go ahead and garnish this with just a little bit more of that herb mixture. So this is a little bit more of a process than it is an actual recipe. So once you figure out how to make the stock, you can add all kinds of different ingredients to it, make all kinds of different soups. This one's kind of a classic. Works really well if you get yourself like a rotisserie chicken. Make chicken noodle soup out of it. Serve it with a little nice bread. If you've been following along with some of our previous segments, that biscuit recipe I did a little while back also goes really well with this. One quick mention, this does make a very large pot of soup and it's very hot. When you go to cool down the leftovers, your average household refrigerator is going to have a really tough time cooling a pot this size that's this warm. So best bet with that, if you want to give your fridge a little bit of help, fill your sink with ice water, put the lid on the pot, put the whole pot right in the sink for probably about a half hour or so. It's going to make a big difference on cooling your leftovers. This stuff freezes really well. And you notice this doesn't have a huge number of noodles in it. Beware of adding too much pasta to your soup. It grows really fast, and what doesn't look like a lot right now is going to look like a lot more tomorrow. Turkey noodle soup. Enjoy.